Welcome to The Author Show, where we feature new authors and books, from fiction to self-help and everything in between. You'll find it all at theauthorshow.com. That's theauthorshow.com. And now let the show begin.
Hello and welcome back to the show. This is your host, Don McCauley. Today we're welcoming the program author Patrick J. Kenny, and he is the author of Taking the Cape Off, How to Lead Through Mental Illness, Unimaginable Grief and Loss. Before I bring in today's guest, a quick reminder that selected interviews are available in our iPhone app, which can be downloaded in the App Store, as well as on TV on the Roku channel and Amazon Fire TV. Our app name on all platforms is simply The Author Show. Patrick, how are you?
I'm good, sir. How are you this morning?
Good. Well, tell us a little bit about yourself, please.
Well, I've spent almost 40 years in public service. I was in the fire profession, just retiring in January. I worked my way up through the ranks in a couple of various departments, including being the fire chief of 2 departments, and have really been very blessed to be a part of that profession.
So tell us about your book.
So Taking the Cape Off was a book written for leaders, in my mind, in any capacity. The book shares lessons I learned from our son, Sean. And Sean was diagnosed with clinical depression at 5. I didn't even know you could have depression at 5. And he battled mental illness for 15 years before he died by suicide at the age of 20. It's also a story about my wife, Eileen, who was diagnosed with brain cancer 10 years later and literally passed away the week before our middle son, Patrick, got married. It documents my journey that I traveled from a leader's perspective through this challenging life. And when I think the cape that I really counted on to help me as a fire chief choked me when I couldn't save my son or my wife in what I felt was my role as a protector. The realization sometimes that I needed to take the cape off and couldn't save everybody provided a lot of lessons that I hope to share with the readers, including what to do when facing mental illness, grief, and loss. It is told through my eyes. I hope it's told in a very transparent message, because that's the goal. I think the book provides lessons learned from all those experiences that I want to pass on to people who are in similar circumstances or have friends and family members they can help through those kinds of crises. It does describe a lot of traumatic experiences, but it's not written from a dark place. But I tried to write it from rather one of hope. It covers my faith, signs I believe I've received that were keys to my resiliency and continue to keep me moving forward even when encountering some of these life challenges that are really hard to even climb over. The goal was when leaders finish reading this book, they will have enough tools, not only in the face of adversity, but just in day-to-day life to be resilient. I hope it gives them hope that they can not only survive in these situations, but I want them to be able to continue to move forward with their lives. It's the goal of the book is to just provide that light and that feeling of hope that I can take a bad situation and make it better either for myself, my coworkers, or my family.
So who did you write your book for specifically? Who's your target audience?
The book is written for leaders in any capacity, and I define leaders as anybody from a single mom all the way up to the CEO of a billion-dollar company. Leaders in all of those aspects are faced with the challenges, specifically dealing with mental health, grief, and loss. You're not lucky enough to be able to avoid those just because you're the leader of an organization or even your family. And that's the audience that I really want to reach, because I believe they'll take something from this book that they can actually use.
So could you say there's any type of central message or perhaps underlying theme that you would say runs throughout your book?
Absolutely. The central message of my book is mental illness is a physical illness. It's not a choice or a character deficiency. And really for centuries, it's been covered in that stigma, leading people to hesitate. They don't want to talk about it. They don't want to come forward for treatment or any kind of help because it's seen as a weakness. It's not seen as a physical illness. It's not comparable to cancer or diabetes. It's something out there that's hideous. And mental illness, just like any type of physical illness, can become terminal. And eventually it can lead to death by suicide, as it did for Sean. The idea is to bust the mental illness stigma, to show people that it is a physical illness, that by communication skills and education and providing resources, that we can take the environment that you operate in, either as a family or in your business, and make it positive when we deal with a mental illness.
So if you had to choose, what would you say is the single most important idea you're sharing in taking the cape off that will really add value to the reader's life?
I believe that all of us in leaders and all of us in general find that we figure we're the only ones that come up with an answer to a difficult situation. And we have to do that on our own. And that's the symbolism of the cape, is I'm going to save the day. I will be the one to do it. And honestly, in a first responder environment, it's perpetuated by that. We are brought to a scene. We are brought to somebody's home to save the day. And all of a sudden, when we run into a situation that we don't understand, or in my case, where you couldn't make a difference, the key being saving the lives of two of the people I love more than anything in the world, you feel like that cape has failed you. And it's that recognition that you need to take the cape off sometimes, that you can't always be the person who's going to save the day, allows you to grow and allows you to handle more situations in a positive manner than you ever thought you could.
So if you could compare your book with any book out there we might already be familiar with, which book would it be and why?
So this book centers its message on 4 topics, those being leadership, mental illness, grief and loss, and faith and signs. And there are many books that cover each of those individual areas, but none that I've run on that cover all 4. So basically, I looked in those categories, and under leadership, turned the ship around by Captain David Marquette, dealing with taking his cape off and leading an organization and changing some of the beliefs in that organization. Mental illness, which is Supernormal by Dr. J, tells stories of resiliency of people who are in difficult situations and the coping mechanisms that they use to survive. Under Grief and Loss, option B by Sheryl Sandberg and Adam Grant talks about her personal journey after losing her husband. How do you continue to raise your children and build a family unit for the future? And finally, Faith and Signs, Shoeless Joe, written by W.P. Kinsella, inspired Field of Dreams. And it talks about making a connection with those who have gone on before you, those in an afterlife who actually can reach out and help guide you through your current life.
So how does faith and belief in signs play into resiliency?
In my mind, resiliency is really trying to put some purpose to the traumas you endure in your life. You can't explain everything that happens to you based on the here and now. From the time I was 14 and heard my dad's deceased voice in a cemetery when I was trying to commit suicide, all the way till today, resiliency has drawn power directly from what I call my faith. And people ask me all the time, how are you able to move forward after all the trauma and tragedies that you've been through? And I always say, I don't travel this path alone. I have a lot of angels that walk alongside of me. And for so many of the sign stories that I share in this book, there is no earthly way to explain how the situation occurred other than something or somebody out there was looking out for us, and I sincerely believe I have that working for me, and all of us do.
So in your opinion, what are the benefits of seeking professional help, and when does that become necessary?
So I'm not a trained clinician. I do have a bachelor's degree in psychology, and as my mother said, it was the biggest waste of money because smart people run out of burning buildings, and my son runs in. But there's no question, just as you would seek a cardiologist if you had chest pains or a mechanic if you had car malfunctions, there are areas that you can't fix by yourself. And when it comes to mental health, it comes to traumas that you're dealing with, you need to seek out somebody who knows that path, who knows where the traps are that you could fall into, who knows the things that you can do to enhance your resiliency. And because mental illness is indeed a physical illness, sometimes there are things that need to be provided in terms of medication for balance as well as for the counseling that can kind of even out the challenge that you're into. And so counseling becomes not just an option, it becomes necessary for people who are struggling.
And what's been your most rewarding experience since publishing Taking the Cape Off?
The program director at Southern Illinois University for a master's degree program in leadership actually selected the book as part of the required reading for the students. And I was invited to sit in on a Zoom call after they had read the book. And one person in particular, a military veteran, stated on the Zoom call that as he read the book, he'd find himself crying. And his wife finally said, "What are you crying so much about in this book?" He said, "I realized that when I was ordered to go to the suicide of a fellow soldier, I didn't want to be there. In fact, I was angry about them taking the easy way out when all the rest of us still had to remain." He said, "When I read the book, I felt a certain sense of sadness for that past behavior I didn't understand. And now I do." And he became, to me, one of Sean's advocates about here's the realities of what happens in suicide. It's not accurate to classify it as a selfish act. It's somebody who's ill, and it's their only way to get away with that pain. The second one was a fire captain who emailed me that he had a son-in-law who committed suicide. He always referred to him as a coward at all family gatherings. After reading the book, he called his daughter, apologized, and said, "I just didn't understand."
Now, did your environment or upbringing play any major role in your writing?
It did. I grew up, my mom, my dad, both from Ireland, and my godmother. I didn't realize at the time, but both my mom and my dad suffered from mental health challenges. My mom had been abused when she was a child. My dad actually, his father, my grandfather, committed suicide. My dad had to cut him down in a barn in Ireland when he was 18. What it impacted was my dad never was able to express emotion in terms of love or physical connection. I didn't figure out later that the reason for that was he was protecting his own emotions. On my mom's side, from the abuse she had gone through, she very much, nothing was ever good enough. Everything was always painted in a negative, and that was the parenting style that I was brought up in. So taking mental illness, looking at also what happens when somebody's got the grief of losing their loved one, I then connected to what happened with losing my own son and then losing my wife, and seeing how do you manage those feelings that you're dealing with and transfer them to your family and other people around you. And it made my style of writing more transparent because I didn't have the transparency for them I needed in order to grow.
So how would you describe your writing style?
So I was very blessed. This is my first book. The consultant I had, Shannon, and my editor, Sarah, agreed that the book needed to be written in my words and in my voice. It's not perfect in terms of grammar and everything, but it's told in my voice. So I would call it a conversationalist style. Really, my goal was I want when the reader is reading the book to feel like they're sitting next to me in a coffee shop, on a bar stool, and I'm telling my story about ways that they can improve their life, learn things that maybe they had misconceptions about, with the goal being that it's taught in the most simple terms and something that they can use in their daily life.
What part of your book would you say you personally like best?
I'd have to say my favorite part was sharing the sign stories, and in particular, my son Sean had a near-death experience that he shared with my wife and I, where he met my father in heaven. My dad died when I was 14. Sean never met him, had never seen pictures of him in his prime, yet he described in detail my dad in his mid-30s. He shared things that only my father and I had talked about. And reliving that story and sharing it with people, even when I go around on a speaking tour, when I tell that story, it gives faith to people that really maybe there is some place somewhere, no matter what you want to call it, where the people they care about and love are there waiting for them. And there's a joy in sharing that story.
So in your opinion, who should buy your book?
In my opinion, the people who really need to buy this book are people who are going to lead anybody, whether you're leading a single individual or you're leading a huge group. So that is a family, that is an organization, however you define it. People who have got to deal with people, that have to deal with the real issues that they're going to run into, which are going to invoke depression and grief. They're going to invoke challenges with mental illness, either to themselves or to other people in their organization. It's going to allow those leaders who need a tool to go, I don't get this. What do I do to provide the best powerful leadership I can? I'm going to grab this book and I'm going to use it as a resource to be able to help my people.
Do you have a website?
I do. My website is patrickjkenny.com. So it's PatrickJKenny.com.
Well, this has been just great. Our guest today has been Patrick J. Kenny, and he's the author of Taking the Cape Off, How to Lead Through Mental Illness, Unimaginable Grief and Loss. Patrick, thanks very much for being with us today.
Thank you very much for the opportunity.
This is Don McCauley wrapping up another edition of The Author Show. Go out there, buy the book today, and please share this interview with your friends so that they too have the opportunity to discover our guests and their work.